Well, good morning if you've just joined us, and welcome to How We Dilute Our Speech and What to Do About It. You can imagine I'm on tenterhooks this morning. I'm going to be trying to make sure that I don't mince my words, dilute my speech and so on. So I'm sure you'll be looking out for it, and the eagle-eyed and and mouse-eared amongst you will be letting me know how I'm doing. What this webinar then is really about, given that there's not a huge amount of participation, what I do want to do is to provoke you into thinking about how you do things, how you say things. Some of the things I'm going to talk about, maybe even all of the things I'm going to be talking about, are not going to be new to you. But I would be willing to bet, like me, that some of these very obvious things you overlook. And so what I'm trying to do is to make the speech process, the way that you express yourself, conscious, so that you make choices about how you deliver your messages. So let me just explain very quickly the sequence of the webinar this morning. So we've got about 30 minutes of material. Oh, ghastly colour. I think I'm going to choose something else. There we are. 30 minutes of material. And then a Q&A at around about 10 o'clock, 5 past. And then a quick summary here. So if you need to get away, you're not going to miss anything after this. And then indeed, if there are any more questions, we'll have more Q&A after 10:15. That's the programme for this morning. Okay, so what is this about? Well, this is about dilution. This is about how we deliver messages in a way which is very often suboptimal. When something is diluted, what we actually are doing, we're making something less strong. Where in the case of course, something like something as ghastly as orange squash, this is a good thing. I don't know if you were fed it at school or at home as a kid, but it's disgusting stuff. But when it comes to important messages, dilution rarely has the effect that we want. The meanings that we're trying to get across get lost, and people start to make assumptions about what we mean. And things end up where they shouldn't be. Often this means that something just doesn't get done. So how does this dilution come about? Well, in my experience, there are a consistent set of things that we do and say, or diluters, that we use, sometimes consciously, and there are sometimes good reasons to soften a message, but very often we do it without thinking. But this is about making it, you consciously turn the power of your messages back up, or at least to dilute on purpose. So, without further ado, here are the main. I've actually concentrated this down into three main things that we do, main diminishing factors that we should be aware of, and as I advertised in the invite, a get out of jail free card. There's a single device that we can use as a way to reverse that dilution. And there's also something we can do to not go there in the first place, to make it easier for us to not be tempted to water down our messages. So all that coming up. So first of all, the first device that people use a lot, and I'll be gobsmacked if you're not one of those, is modifiers. What's a modifier? Well, these are words that tone down or modify the meaning of the words that they're paired with. Now, modifiers in themselves shouldn't be a problem if we all knew what other people meant when they said, for example, a bit or slightly. There is no way to objectively quantify a bit or slightly. If I said, well, I'm annoyed, but I'm only 50% annoyed, then you might stand a slightly better chance if you knew me. And actually, very often when I'm working with people, when we're working with groups or individuals, I say, on a scale of 1 to 10, where are you now in terms of, excited, interested, or whatever? And people then have some sort of scale to peg it with. But most of us, when we use those extra words, we don't really know if we're hearing or meaning the same as the next person who says those little bits and pieces. So What I'm going to ask you now, first opportunity to join in, is to tell me, and by writing in on the Q&A pane, what you actually find yourself using. What modifiers, what little verbal devices do you hear yourself using when you're toning down a message? Either by accident, in which case you've caught yourself afterwards, or on purpose, because you're trying to get a particular effect. So what sort of things do you find yourself saying? So Eleonora says, believe. I believe. That's a really good softening word. I guess it's an alternative to I think. Deborah says, I have to tell you. That's a cracker. So it's like it's not your choice. Oh, okay. Petra's come up with a whole load of crackers. Quite, a bit, a little. Yeah, they're absolutely classic, Deborah. Kate says, Kate's one of Kate's favourites. And when she's giving feedback, it's just a small point. That is an absolute belter. It makes you. Presumably, it tries to take the heat off it. It makes the person less worried. Well, there are some really good ones. Let's see if there are any more skulking there in the background. No, I think that's about it. So yeah, all of those are going to really tone things down very nicely. The one I hear a lot, particularly in younger people, actually, is sort of. You will have heard that too, or just. Yeah, so here we are, just. So these words, sometimes called weasel words, have a knack or have the tendency, almost invariably, unless we know the person who's using it very well, to diminish what we're actually saying. So that's the first thing that we're trying to watch out for. How am I modifying my speech? Okay. Here's the second one, and this piece was actually, or this word was actually introduced to me by a client who had this lovely expression. In fact, I've seen some more words came up while I was talking. That the Q&A pane isn't behaving itself. It's hiding some of the information from me. Let me see if I can. Before I press on. Oh, yes, there were more. Sampa said, what I'm trying to say is another cracker for her. Most likely, Eleonora uses, yes, I think when she actually, Sally says, I use I think when actually I know. Oh, Suzanne has a good one. I'm sorry, I've just scrolled down. They've changed the system and it doesn't show the words as it did before. As I understand it, says Suzanne. Very diplomatic. And yeah, okay. Julie says, a little frustrated. Vicky says, it's just that. So, help me, says Tony. So it's as if the person who's getting the feedback or the message is actually helping Tony rather than Tony bringing something disastrous to their notice, I gather. So a lot more than I first saw. Well, so thank you very much indeed for your inputs. So now, this is an expression, as I said, that the client came up with, which I just thought encapsulated somehow how we, all of us at some point, when we're in front of somebody of some stature, somebody who rather freaks us out. She had this title for it. She called it her mouse voice. And I've translated it into a mouse attitude, because behind her voice, which she recognized, and here was a ferociously intelligent woman who in banking, who was very, very keen to be seen as a serious principal and eventually partner. Absolutely no doubt about her intellectual acumen. But what she did is that she adopted this mouse attitude. So when she spoke up at a meeting, she would hear herself putting on this little voice, and it so wasn't her. And it would drive her to tears of frustration afterwards that she'd let herself down yet again. So What is mouse attitude? Well, it's really, for me, it's about when we come against somebody who is larger than life, who has a lot of our destiny apparently in their hands, and we find ourselves cowering before them, albeit very professionally. I was actually speaking to some company secretaries, a fantastic group, a couple of evenings ago at a speaking event, and they, these were some people, men and women of a great deal of experience, who were, of course, having to face up to some of the most powerful and intimidating chairmen, and I have to say it was mostly chairmen rather than chairpersons or chairwomen, and they really had to toughen up sometimes when they were facing up. And some of the language that we discussed, it was a similar topic we were talking about that evening, put me in mind of this mouse attitude. And they knew they were doing it, but they had found workarounds. So this is exemplified, for example, if I walk into your office and I say, do you have a minute? Well, you and I both know that I don't want a minute. Nothing takes a minute. So why am I asking for only a minute? Well, the fact is, I'm not asking for what I really want because it sounds such a long time. It's as if I'm imposing on their time. It's as if their time is so much more important than mine. Now, what happens there? Well, the most disastrous part of all that is that, of course, you have to ask, is this person going to take me seriously? Are they actually going to pick up on my demeanour, and is that going to bring the bully out in them? Not systemic bullying, but the more brash, the more forthright, rather less approachable side of them. One of the ways in which bullying, or victims and sort of not attackers, but the people on the aggressive part of that system, depends on somebody doing a bit of cowering. And it is very easily done, and even experienced people do it. So what happens is that if I'm not taking my message seriously, if I'm asking for less than I want, by using diminishing language and by going in on my knees, then I've made myself feel small to boot, and I am just waiting to be diminished. I'm expecting it. I'm actually inciting it. So what do we do about that? Well, this is, for me, it's about actually asking for what we want. It's actually standing there at our desks, not when I get up to the boss's door, not when I get to the boardroom, not when I get to wherever I have to make the request or demand, and I make a decision. Am I going to go in through a hole in the skirting board, or am I going to go in through the door? And that mindset change, I think that attitude makes such a huge difference to our speech. So this isn't just about changing what we say, this is about changing how I feel before I even get to the door. And being realistic and being honest with myself about what I want. Because it doesn't matter who I am in the organisation, if I'm there for a purpose. And if I knock myself down, if I diminish myself, then I am actually cheating my organisation out of my reason for being there. I'm cheating them out of part of my salary. I believed, and this is genuine, that I have a responsibility to be as strong as I need to be to get a message across. And obviously I have to pick my messages. Now, you might think, well, Paul, it's very easy for you to say this. You're on the outside, you're a consultant, you don't have a boss. Well, actually, of course, think about it. Everybody is my boss. And so I am going in and disrupting and very often asking for a lot more time than an individual or an organisation has been used to putting into their team, their leadership style, the way they communicate. And I'm constantly bringing people's attention back to some very basic things. And sometimes I get embarrassed that I'm bringing the same thing up again and again when a team is still getting stuck on something again and again. So it's not just from within that we get stuck with this stuff, that we put on mouse behaviours and going through the skirting board. It actually happens to us independents on the outside who apparently have the freedom to do what we please. The reality is that it doesn't feel that way. So the rule applies to whether you're an internal, an employee, a member of staff at any seniority level, or an outsider. Okay, and now for the third one. Now this also sneaks in a lot. This happens very frequently, and this again happens at all levels in the organisation. So this third thing is about quantity. And quantity manifests in a number of different things, or a number of different ways. But one of the things we do when we have a big message and we're worried about how it's going to land, how we're going to make the other person feel, is that we use a lot of fancy words to cover up what we actually mean. And what happens is that we might not get spotted, but if we do get spotted, then the person actually realizes why we're there and thinks, well, this isn't really good. Why didn't they tell me before? And if they didn't tell me before, it must be for a negative reason. It must be that they're not sure of themselves, or it must be that they know I'm going to get annoyed or I'm going to be against it, so I will be. So by going in, disguising a big message with lots of alternative words, it will ultimately come back to haunt us. Because if they do get the message, despite all the words, we've started off on a very bad footing, and they're already making assumptions about us and what we've told them that is disruptive to what we're trying to make happen. Adding extra words really does soften the message. There's no doubt about that. But what it makes people do is to look sometimes for a problem. And once they find out what that problem is, then it's very difficult for them to actually pay attention to the original message. They actually get freaked out. So by using lots of words, what we're doing is trying to distract people from the real meaning. But when they find out what the real meaning is, they will react badly. And you're going to have to start all over again. Either way, using great quantities of words, if the distraction works, you've failed in trying to get your message across. And if the distraction doesn't work, in other words, they do get your message, then they're going to be confused or puzzled, certainly suspicious, probably frustrated, or all of those things. So quantity really doesn't work as a softener. Okay, so here is how to fix this dilution. Let's face it, we are all going to do it. We're all going to find ourselves in a situation where we really are trying to get a message across. We're trying to be brave about it, but it's going to get the better of us. So avoiding these devices is great, but whilst we're doing it, there is help at hand. The good news is that once we have diluted a message, unlike with orange squash, we can actually re-strengthen it. And the way we do that is by correcting ourselves. And this is how it might sound. When I said a bit, I actually meant a lot, John. When I said I needed a minute, actually, I'm going to need about 10 minutes. It's important. Look, I realise I've gone off at a tangent. I'm using a lot of words here. What I really wanted to say was this. So I think an incredibly powerful way of fixing dilution when I have used too many words is to correct myself. The irony is that makes the original message even more powerful. because I'm drawing attention to the fact that it was diluted the first time round. I'm calling myself on my own mistake. And that waves a huge red banner above that thing that I was trying to communicate. So these explicit corrections often have the effect of magnifying the originally desired effect. People stop short. And they stop short because it's such an unusual thing to do. People are used to speeches, they're used to polish. And when we say something that is spontaneous, that is authentic, it sticks out like mad. And people say, whoa, he's really, she's really thinking about it. She's really in the room. She's present. She's looking me in the eye and correcting herself. So what's the learning here? Well, the learning here is you always get a second chance. And it looks like that second chance is even better than the first one. So really, it doesn't matter if you find yourself using too many words or little bits of extra words, the modifiers, or creeping around a bit like a mouse, because you can correct all that. So that's how to fix the dilution problem. That's the remedy. But how do I avoid the whole dilution thing in the first place? Is there something that we can do that helps us to stay away from those common problems? Well, of course, creating the proper space is important. We've discussed that. You prepare yourself before you leave your own desk or office and say, okay, I'm going to ask for what I need. I'm going to use the door. And I'm also going to keep it really simple for myself. So along those lines, here's a way I want to show you. Here is a way of actually constructing the right sort of talk to come out of your mouth so that you are more likely to be really clean about how you express yourself, to actually calibrate the strength of the message at the level that you originally intended when you were sitting at your desk. So what I'm suggesting you experiment with, and you might just pick on something really simple, even while you're there right now at your desk. Think of somebody that you need to get through to. Almost certainly there will be a conversation that you need to have today where you think, I really need this one to land. I need them to understand me first time. So here's what you might do. Construct a very simple statement that incorporates these three ingredients. Firstly, how you feel. So if it's something about, you're talking to somebody and you need them to really take on a piece of work that they don't really want to do, straight off the top of my head. You think, well, why do I want them to do it? Well, I really want them to do it because they're going to get it right first time. So the feeling I might have is, I'm confident, I'm certain, I'm very keen. Okay, so that's the first thing. I'm confident, I'm certain, I'm keen. And I'm going to choose one of those. What am I having that feeling about? Well, I'm very keen that they should take on the piece of work. I'm confident that they can do it well. Okay. And why? Well, because they've done it before, or is it because they did such a brilliant job on a previously tricky task? So then, having constructed this very simple sentence, John, I'm really keen to persuade you to take a piece of work on, because I think you have the greatest chance of getting it right first time, and time is really important to us. And then at the end of that, pausing. Now, a couple of things about using this. I'm loath to call it a technique, but this device, this way of constructing a message. The first thing is it's brief. So because it's brief, we're less likely to add extra words, or at least we're more likely to notice that we're adding extra words. So it's sparse and encourage us to not add those weasel words, those modifiers. Because we're not expecting ourselves to say very much, it's okay if we're nervous when we're doing it. We're unlikely to mush up our words. And thirdly, it also forces us to address what we really want, what we're really trying to resolve. So there's a way of constructing a little piece of meaning which is going to help us in the first place to avoid all of those other problems that we had. Even the mouse attitude is fixed by using a feeling, because by calling to mind the feeling, it reminds us of how strong our sentiment is about that particular issue. Okay, it's just about 10 o'clock. I would be very keen to hear and read your thoughts on all this. So it's your turn now. What are you thinking? Where are you on this topic? Is this making sense to you? What do you think? Do you have observations? Is there anything that you think isn't going to work, or work where you are, or you've tried this and it didn't stack up for you? It would be great to read some of the things that you have to say. I think so, Deborah. I think going in confident is the key. I have a conversation this morning, in which I will use this. Brilliant. Tony asks, did you say the second chance can be stronger? If so, is this a good tactic? I am so pleased you asked that, Tony. I have a problem with tactics because I think everybody knows. Human beings are sufficiently sensitive and clever to know when the tactic is being used on them. So if you are doing it on purpose, it'll come across as hammy. Unless you have spent a time that I didn't know about, Tony, training with the RSC, but I really wouldn't try it. The chances are, it so often happens that we do mince our words and use modifiers and so on that we're probably going to have to do it anyway, but it's a good point. As a tactic, I would say no. What else is coming up? Okay. Vicky reckons it sounds quite direct. How do you do the positioning piece without using modifiers? That's interesting. Okay, so the positioning piece, I guess, Vicky, you're saying is when you first walk into the room, walk up to the door, or you whatever, and you and instead of saying, do you have a second? I think that's the brave bit, actually. Vicky, you've probably put your finger on it. It's actually saying, it's preparing back at your desk. What do I really want? Do I want 5 minutes? Do I want an opinion? Do I want to tell him what I'm going to do? Am I asking her for permission? What is this conversation for? So there's that verb there, isn't there? What verb am I going to use? Am I asking, consulting, bouncing an idea off? And how much time do I want? So if you can get over that bit, Vicky, I think you're pretty much home and dry, because then the person sees, 5 minutes, okay, I've got 5 minutes. If the person says I've got 2 minutes, or I've only got a minute now, then turn them down flat and say, a minute, very nice, but not enough. Tell me when you've got more. I don't want to do it in a rush. And that will already underline that you've got something important to say. But thank you for that one, Vicky. Okay, Karen. Oh, I haven't seen you for ages, Karen. How lovely to see you again. A voice from the past. Nice to learn in bite-sized chunks. Thank you very much indeed, Karen. Petra, I have come across a person, whenever I went in with a concise statement, he would stop me in my tracks, ask me to go a step back, and then bombard me with questions to take over the control of the conversation. Yes, interesting. How do I deal best with that? That's a good one. That's one I've seen a lot in the city, in banking, and it is something that some people use on purpose because they feel defensive themselves. And it is intimidating to be on the receiving end of. And you know what, Petra? I'm thinking, gosh, what you've taken me aback now. I'm thinking, what would I do? And I suppose the clue is what I just said, which is I'm taken aback by your questions. I think the single most important thing we can do for ourselves is to stick up for our feelings, is to admit when we're stuck. Something happens when we become intimidated, and it's all emotional. And what happens is it prevents us from being able to think straight. Our neurons, or in all that lovely grey matter we have, become disabled by a flood of emotional neurotransmitters. So when somebody presses our buttons, does that power play on us? Take a step back. Now, what about this? What about that? What about... Have you thought about that? When somebody does that and it presses your buttons, pretty much the only thing you know at that time is that you feel awful. The quickest way to get rid of feeling awful is to say it in some way. I'm surprised by all your questions. I really didn't expect you to say that. Here's one. I'm struggling to answer all those questions. I didn't expect you to come straight out with them. I really wanted to explain first. I didn't expect the questions. So the closer you can get to the truth, that wins for me, Petra. I hope that's satisfactory enough for you. Denise, as an employee, how do you say how you feel without coming across as confrontational or too forward? So, Denise, you're worried that by mentioning a feeling at work or to a boss, it might seem too in your face, too, well, you use the word forward, too brash. This is one of those, you're going to have to trust me on this one. No, actually, don't trust me on this one, Denise. Try it out somewhere else. Try it out with people that you respect outside work. I can tell you with confidence, try it at work and you will get a reaction that you don't expect, a good one. But if you need that confidence booster, try it somewhere else a few times and see what reactions you get. The fact is that people do care about each other's feelings at all levels. We really do. And when somebody is good enough to be honest about their feelings, then it, in my experience, and it's very wide experience, is almost never rejected. So hopefully that is sufficiently satisfactory for you, Denise. Deborah, some people prefer to hear modifiers rather than straight to the... Do some people prefer to hear modifiers? They might prefer it, Deborah, but do you want to do it? Because at some point, if the message doesn't land, you're going to have to go back and correct them. Julia, last question just before I break off to summarise. How do you avoid sounding blunt or brutal? So, Julia, you're worried about it coming across as too strong. Well, that's a really good question. The thing to do there is to actually make sure that you choose the right emotion word. So if you want to have a smaller, gentler meaning, use a smaller feeling. So instead of saying I'm really determined to push this through, you could say I'm very keen, or I'm keen. Interestingly, did you hear I used a modifier there? I used the word very. That usually is superfluous. It really doesn't help us. So choose that emotion word in that little construction I gave you. Choose that one carefully, and that's the thing. That's the work to do at your desk. Am I keen? Am I annoyed? Or am I puzzled? Am I frustrated? Or am I, peeved maybe, or disappointed? Work on the vocabulary, and I think you can calibrate your messages very carefully, Julia. Okay, for now, there are about 10 questions left. I'm not going to abandon those, but just for now, just in case people need to get back to their desks or back to the day job, I'm just going to go for the summary, if you will. Okay, so final thoughts here. The first one is try to really be aware of what the main message is. So I would say more feelings, less water. Keep it very brief. If Twitter has taught us one thing, it's to be very sparse with words. I think it is a terrific template for learning to get to the point. And probably most powerfully of all, at least for me, is this business of getting a second chance. We can actually correct ourselves, and it has a fantastic impact on the strength of the message. Next time, I have got a topic lined up for you, which is exciting, and I would very much like your input. Now, as far as I know, it's the next webinar is on Friday, the 15th of April. It's come forward a bit because I'm in the States, working with the team out in Denver. But that's to the best of my knowledge, unless Nicola has a better idea, and she almost always does. Friday, 15th of April, 9:30 is when we're going to get together again. And this time, the topic then will be one that I don't think I have covered for a few years, and that is meetings. Meetings, all about meetings. What I'd really like to hear is from you, what you like about them, what you hate about them. What do you do? How do you run your meetings? So I suppose the topic is taking the time waste and the horridness and the boredom, tedium and frustration out of meetings. There we are, that's the title. Taking the frustration and boredom out of meetings. Would be great to hear your war stories and experiences. The positives as well as the negatives would be fantastic. If you have to go now, thank you so much for coming along. And big thanks to Nicola as usual, who actually runs the show in the background. Thanks to Jeff as well. He gets all our mailings. He's our resident guinea pig, non-executive who comes on the webinars and then gives us short, sharp feedback afterwards about what he thought. So thank you for being there for us, Jeff. And yeah, we're going to have some extra Q&A time now. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but that's no bad thing. And so stick around if you can for the remaining questions. And again, have a fantastic weekend and thanks for coming along. So if you're still around, I'm now going to go back to the questions. And Haley says, I'll be trying out the assertive talk later today. I'm going to leave now. Thanks, Paul. Thank you, Haley. Suzanne, you usually open up by saying, is it okay to talk? Do you have a few minutes? I quite like that, actually, Suzanne. And I suppose somebody who knows you, when Suzanne says, I have a few minutes, they probably know what she means. Is it okay to talk? Yeah, I actually rather like that, Suzanne. Yeah, good one. Mike says, I like the idea of correction. You need to be mindful to do this. Yes, you're right. And by definition, if you're waffling, your chimp brain is probably in charge. So how might you give yourself space to notice that you need correcting? So you need to be mindful. It may be, Mike, to do with their reaction, and that if they seem uncertain or not bought in or won over, you may suddenly realise, oh, I've used a lot of words, haven't I? My thought is that if you're like me, and you're almost certainly not, but I can hear myself when I'm talking, like when I'm giving these webinars and I know where I'm supposed to be on the script and what time it is, and I hear myself talking and thinking, Paul, you're going off on one, or where the hell are you in this script? And so very often I'm listening. I might not actually be that present, and very often in these webinars my chimp brain is working because there's a lot going on. I have a lot of different buttons and things to press. I'm doing drawings and so on and so forth. So I have some evidence to suggest, Mike, that actually even with the chimp brain rather than my good brain involved or engaged, one can still spot when the words are coming out too much. I hope that's good enough. Bethan, how best approach and prepare when you need a piece of work from a senior manager? You've asked several times, but they are too busy. Well, that's a good one. And actually that came up with the company secretaries the other evening. As you can imagine, they're chairmen and chair people, and actually even particularly in banking, everybody has a perfect excuse for being busy because there's always big money involved or a quick decision. So this is about going back to somebody several times. I always bounce back to trying to tell as much of the truth as I can. So in this case, what would that sound like? In this case, it would sound like, hang on a second, see if I can actually draw something. I'm just going to give myself a free layer as well. There we go. I would say something like, yeah, I'm embarrassed to raise this again. I'm worried about hassling you. I do still need it. I'm embarrassed to bring this up again because I know you're busy, but I also know that this needs to be done. So I think just if you can bring yourself to tell the truth about how you're feeling about making the approach for the third or fourth time, I think that could help to, by you telling the truth, I think it often flushes the truth out from them. They might say, well, look, I've got to be honest, Bethan, I just can't do this. I just don't know when I'm going to find the time. And then you can go into empathy. You sound really snowed under. And so we start paying attention to their problems. But at least then, Bethan, you're getting the real reason that they're not doing it. Hopefully that's good enough. Vicky says, comment from Kath. You're relaying. I find myself using diluting words often, so good to know that we get a second chance. Absolutely, definitely. Great. Hugh, the message I take from this session is about being clear about the overall purpose which the conversation relates to, then absolutely about keeping quantity of words to minimum and being precise and simple in the language, and further connecting to the feelings, the motivation, nice way of putting it, and driving the conversation that connects both to the other and to the purpose. Yeah. So yeah, the feelings are in there, keeping it concise, having a very distinct purpose in our minds. Yeah, thank you, Hugh. Karen, emotions are still viewed as negative in the workplace. I often hear, take emotions away, use only logic. Ah, yes. And let me tell you what that relates to. A penny to a pinch of salt, Karen. When people say, let's take the emotion out of it, what they really mean is, let's take the show. I don't want to see your emotions. I don't want to be embarrassed by the demonstration, by the gesticulation, by the raising of voices, by the crying or frustration. People don't want to see it. And actually, paradoxically, saying the words takes the emotion out of our behavior and puts it into the logic of the sentence, puts it into the landscape, into the logical stuff that we're talking about. So by speaking emotions, we actually stop behaving them. And that allows us to be very real, very authentic, very truthful in our organization and in our meetings. It's when we try and disguise our emotion in proper professional language that we become the most upset, frustrated and annoyed, and then we act it and we start spitting our words out or faltering or using inappropriate language, and that's where people say, let's take the emotion out of it. So that's the approach that I would take with that one, Karen. I hope that works for you. Kate, when I have used my feelings, I have been told I am too sensitive. Well, Kate, you're the lucky one. People who call other people, who say that other people are too sensitive, are actually probably rather frightened of people who have feelings. But a thought for you, Kate, try to, if you notice your feelings welling up or they're starting to happen, you might want to experiment with talking about your feelings sooner, because it could be that you've already started to show and feel them a lot. So when your feelings are very small, if you could have a crack at actually talking about it sooner, then you may come across as being more in charge of them. So rather than waiting, rather than waiting before the feelings happen or waiting until after it's subsided, when you can talk about the feeling in a way which isn't in the middle of the display, then people aren't going to be able to take a pop and say, oh, you're too sensitive. But I've got to say, Kate, that being sensitive, I think, is a gift, and feelings are, I think, by far the most useful component of serious logical decision making. If we didn't have feelings, if we weren't sensitive, we would screw up so often. And in fact, people who have brain injury, insults to certain centers of the brain that produce and process feelings, they are very unfortunate. They're not able to process information. They can't make fine decisions. They can make very few decisions. They can't form memories. There's all sorts of things that go wrong when we're not sensitive. So, be happy with your sensitivity. It's a good one, and it's almost certainly the other person's problem, for want of a better word. I'm just quickly going through. That's it, I think, for the questions. It's been great having you here this morning. Thank you so much for staying on. There's still a good few of you here, so fantastic. I'm glad you hung on, and I hope it was worth it. And without further ado, have a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you next month for everything to do with meetings. Recording on the way on Wednesday, and a 2-minute model on the way in the next week or two. Take care and have a good weekend.